on one hand, we've moved from children should be seen and not heard, and you just follow the rules and do what I tell you, to now I feel like everything is about the kids.
Where does mental health play in all of this parental pressure?
Well, there's the parental anxiety to get it right. We don't want our kids to struggle. Like, it's so hard, and it pulls on your heartstrings when your kids struggle, but struggle is inevitable. Your kids are going to struggle. You don't get to choose. You do not get to choose when they struggle. Just the same way as a parent, you have to allow yourself to mess up. I'm a mom and I'm a psychologist, but being a psychologist didn't protect me quite as a mom to get it all right either. You're just learning on the go.
Today, how are kids seeing therapy?
They love coming to therapy. They're excited about coming to therapy. They'll even tell their friends they're coming to therapy.
What is the cost of the pressure?
There's no manual for your kid, for your situation, for your resources.
It's so scary.
It is.
Dr. Danda, thank you for being here today. And I want to start this conversation from a quote that you made on a recent podcast. You said, the greatest generation came out of World War II. The worst generation came out of COVID. I want us to dissect that. And I want to hear from you today. How did you came to the conclusion? What happened, during COVID that made you believe this?
Right. Well, in the greatest generation in World War II, there was a very clear enemy that was away from us, and it required a lot of sacrifice. So a lot of the men went off to war, and then the women actually then needed to help support, and they even needed to, donate things. There was scarcity in a lot of products and things like that. And there was this great feeling because there was also a big win. And I think so when people came back, I feel like people came together, they celebrated the win. And so it just made for a really positive community. And people really did have to band together in order to do it. So you contrast that with COVID, and COVID said, okay, everybody retreat, everybody on their own, create your little bubbles of different people. And then it was also not only that, it was a common enemy, but there wasn't a common way to combat it. There's a lot of differences and divisiveness about how do you combat it. We didn't know a lot about it. And then it was also became, not only do you have to retreat from people, it was also a lot of now I'm afraid of people. And also now you're harming me. There's a lot of you're harming me if you're not doing X, Y, and Z on either side. Whatever side you are on, the other person was wrong, and you're harming me either by not wearing a mask or not letting us return to what our life is. And so there was a lot of, it was just created a lot of divisiveness, and community fell away. I think a lot of community organizations, churches, attendance fell, and I'm not sure it's even recovered since then. And so there just was, it's a lot of divisiveness. And so I feel like that's where it's kind of a worst generation a little bit. It's a hard generation. I don't want to call it the worst generation, but it's been really hard to come back to community.
Yeah, and one more thing that I noticed after hearing you say that, something that registered in my head was after World War II, I feel like the middle class actually thrived. I feel like we found a collective back then to your point. That was a common enemy, and then now we after World War II, people came back together and then actually build structure, build families. And now after COVID, now you see that there's a fall in birth rate. The divorce rate is 50% now. I'm sure it's probably even worse after COVID, which the stats are not even out yet. But where do the parents play in this decline after COVID, and what does that pressure look like?
The pressure on parents was immense because all of a sudden you had to fulfill, you had to be a teacher. There's a reason that I did not homeschool my kids. I am not a great teacher. So it was a lot of stress on parents to be able to monitor their kids and then also still be able to function and work. Either you were working remotely and your kids were trying to do school, or you didn't have the opportunity to work remotely. If you were essential, you had to go in, and then your kids, what do you do with your kids? Your kids can't be home alone. And so it was an immense pressure to care for kids. I know that there was a large drop-off of women who ended up staying home more because they just needed to be able to be with their kids, and there wasn't really a lot of alternatives or support to kind of create that. And then I think the other part of that is I feel like there's two things. So COVID kind of just made there a lot of pressure, and it was a lot of isolation. So ideally, you thrive in a community where you can rely on other people. So, hey, have your kids come over to my house. I'll hang out with them for a while. I'll send my kids over to your house, things like that. You could thrive on that. Or people would come and say like, oh, hey, do you need some food? Or, people thrive in community when you have people to band together and support each other. So there's the isolation. And then I think also the internet and social media has a lot to do with it. The explosion of parenting advice is huge, right? It used to be Dr. Spock, right? Let me just get through the first pages. Dr. Spock will tell us kind of what's going on. And now, every week or every few months, there's always somebody saying, this is what you need to do for your kids. And every parent wants the best for their kids. They always want what's better for their kids than kind of what they had a little bit. And so in some ways, parents feel like this pressure to make it right, to make it great, to make it well, but there's so much information out there. How do you do that? It's almost like dieting, right? How much information is out there about dieting? There's so much.
That I never look at.
And honestly, though, it's the one that works for you.
Right.
When I think about dieting and when I think about parenting, it's really about finding the balance that works for you. You take all the information in, and then you figure out how it works for your family. And so that's where I think there's too much pressure and all of the whole, people posting everything. Right.
Yeah, so, that's especially me having a newborn right now. It's like even, like me and my wife sometimes, I can tell she's struggling to figure out what to share.
Right.
Because she knows that I'm very big on privacy. Even though I post so much, but I only post on a professional level. I share so much, but there's so much in my personal life that I've never shared.
Yes.
And she's someone who's like very big on posting.
Yeah.
She's like, she got to share for the gram. So now that we have a newborn, it's been very interesting, seeing her trying to, navigate that with me.
Right.
And then trying to communicate. And then me, on the other hand, trying to like be supportive of what she enjoys doing, but then also have some boundaries because there's so much dangers on the internet, especially me being someone who works on the internet. I have a background in software, so I feel like I have some understanding of the dangers of the internet. Sharing your child's face at such a young period, you can create an entire, like persona for that baby from the moment they were a baby all the way to being a grown up. You've built an entire, their biometric features on the internet that anyone can use. In your own, I guess the kids that you work with, because I know you do specialize with like working with kids.
Yep.
How is that pressure impacting the kids, the parents' pressure? And the reason why I ask you this, because my own experience with pressure, my dad had an entire vision of what I had to do. Right. And eventually I had a moment where I just, just had to blow out and literally moved from one continent to the US because I just could not handle it. That was so much required of me.
Right.
I had to be good at playing sports. I had to be good at being a student. And I had to work for him because, to a point that I skipped 2 grades during school. Right. I was like the perfect child. They were literally grooming me, in a positive way to become this, upstanding, like citizen. He even had vision of me running for office back in our country, Gambia. That's the crazy vision he had. And he was always excited whenever he's talking about it. And I feel like that's how we always connected. But I felt like I had so many things that I wanted to do. We never talked about it. Yeah. But the pressure to me turned into me leaving everything and just moving to a different continent. How do you see that play out in your own space as you work with these kids?
It plays out in a couple of different ways. I feel like on one hand, we've moved from children should be seen and not heard, and you just follow the rules and do what I tell you, to now I feel like everything is about the kids.
Right.
And so, yes, we want to validate and support what their perspective is. We want them to help discover themselves, but yet at the same time, they need to have some of those boundaries. They need to have some guidelines. We can't lean so far into their emotion and their personalities that we forget to set some guidelines along the way, because they need that structure to kind of grow and develop. And as parents, we have to let them grow and develop at their own pace. And, you have to let them be the kid, to your point, that they are, not the kid you imagine them to be.
Right.
And I think that's really hard for parents because they can see the potential and they can see what they're capable of, but it's up to the kids to find their way.
Right.
And that's really hard. That's really, really hard. So I have a PhD. I love school. I've been in school. I love to learn. Yeah, my kids, not so much. I do not understand how that happened. That I have such a love of school, and none of my kids really loved school. It was a struggle for all of them. And so that was a big issue that I had to deal with is, okay, well, how do I help and make sense of, okay, this isn't necessarily, school is not their passion, it's not their way. How do I help support them still becoming who they want to be, who they are, while also still helping them pass? I mean, they have to pass school, right?
Like, hey,
it's required.
Yes.
So that was, I had to like step back a lot because my pressure on them created, problems in our relationships. Because then it was like, I'm just nagging them all the time about their school stuff. So it was trying to find balance.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's my goal for parents, is to help them find balance. So I feel like we kind of find the balance between honoring who they are, honoring their emotions, but also they do still need some guidelines. Like, yes, you still need to do this. Yes, this is good for you. So they don't get to have all the choices.
Right. No, yeah. Wow. Yeah.
The other,
shout out to you.
Yeah.
Like finding that balance, because
it's not easy.
It's not easy. Even me as a parent right now, I have a 7-year-old as well, and he hates sports. I played sports professionally.
So you have that similar thing where you're like, how does this child that I know came from my DNA?
Yeah, he likes to play with Legos. He likes to go in the backyard and dirt. He likes hiking. Things that I don't like at all. I was like, what happened here? Like, he likes to go hiking. I was like, oh my God, what happened? So, I'm trying to balance letting him do what he likes to do, but every now and then I would just leave a soccer ball somewhere and then see how he acts. He just picked up drums, which I'm very excited. I also used to be a drummer.
My son's both of my sons two of my sons did some drumming for a while. One of them got way into it.
Oh, that's
and
nice.
that was the thing that I was able to support him in.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of the things where he was able to grow and develop in different ways that like he didn't do in school. Right. He didn't necessarily develop. I mean, he did grow and develop in school, but not the same way. Like, that was his passion and he learned a lot. And that's where he had mentors. And I think that's really important too, is we need that community where I think all 3 of my boys are. Oh,
you have 3 boys?
I have 3 boys.
Oh, my Lord.
Yes. And they're 18, 20, and 22.
So they had a lot of fights.
Me
and my older brother.
And they're all very different personalities.
Really.
But they all had mentors in their own way. And I think that was also something that really was helpful, especially during their teen years, is because they were involved in different things, and they had other people besides parents. Because, as teenagers, parents are important, right? You've laid the foundation, and they do come back to you, and they do value what you have to say, but they're not going to do that directly.
Yeah.
And they need that those outside mentors to help support them. So as an adult, I say, be a mentor. Know that what you do when you interact with young kids and young adults makes a difference.
Right. So like, as a parent, how do you play in the role of, letting them go and finding those mentors? Do you have to be part of that process as well, or you just let them go and find that out themselves?
Usually it's in activities, right?
So like sports
or like my oldest was in robotics, and he had a great mentor in robotics. My middle child ended up going to the alternative school, and it was the best thing ever. He was like the star student there, but they had great mentors. Yeah. And he, I think, got a lot of self-esteem out of that process. Like, wow, I can do all these things. Right. And then my youngest with drums, he had a lot of great people in terms of his the drum teacher. That's and awesome. The band teacher, like, really supported him really well.
Oh, that's good. So like, where does mental health play in all of this parental pressure, both on the parent side and then also on the child side? Like, what kind of mental health challenges do you see that, within the child or the parent?
Well, there's the parental anxiety to get it right. I think, it's kind of just inherent in who you are as a parent. You want good things for your kids. And in that, anxiety, sometimes we may try to do too much. We may try to clear the path. We may try to make things go too smoothly for them. We don't want our kids to struggle.
Right.
Like, it's so hard and it pulls on your heartstrings when your kids struggle, but struggle is inevitable. Your kids are going to struggle. You don't get to choose. You do not get to choose when they struggle.
Right.
And so I think one of it is, you have to allow your kids to struggle. You have to allow your kids to mess up. Just the same way as a parent, you have to allow yourself to mess up, right? I'm a mom and I'm a psychologist, but being a psychologist didn't protect me quite as a mom to get it all right either. Like, you're just learning on the go. And so part of it is letting your kids struggle and figure it out. And the hardest thing to do is what I call sit in the suck with your kids, right? You don't get to choose their timeline either. Like, you want to just be like, hey, struggle gone. Can I just erase it? If you were a Jedi, that's what you would do. Or, emotions and life challenges are not like, skin knees. You can't just put a Band-Aid on it and be like, it's okay. Sometimes it takes longer than you really want to. And so that's one of my messages to parents too, is have hope when there's struggle. It doesn't necessarily define your kid. It may change your kid, but it doesn't have to define a negative path or a negative outcome. So I think that's what I feel like on the parent side. On the kid side, I think it's just keeping open and curiosity. And I think if you have that relationship, with your parent who they're ready to listen, then they're going to be more likely to come and talk to you. And so that's what if you have a parent and they are uncomfortable with struggle, they're uncomfortable with emotion, because I don't know about you, but that was not part of my upbringing. Let's talk about our feelings.
Oh, same here.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't, so it's something that parents are having to learn at the same time as their kids. And I also find that kids are actually much more aware of their emotions, but they don't always know what to do with them, and neither do their parents. And so as a parent, your instinct is to fix it or dismiss it. Right? Just because it's hard to do. But that actually will shut down your kid, and they won't come to you because they don't want your reaction, or they might feel like you don't understand them, or they don't want to be a bother. And so I think that's part of, if you can listen to your kid and let them be in the struggle without necessarily trying to fix it, unless they want your advice. Sometimes I'll be like, hey, I got some ideas. Do you want to hear what I have to say? Because I also tell parents to save their breath if their kids aren't ready to listen, especially with like teens and tweens. So I think there's some of that pressure for kids that, if parents want them to do really well, there's, like you said, there's that pressure to kind of also want to do well, and they don't want to mess up. I feel like there's some of that's always been there. I don't know that COVID necessarily exacerbated that part of it, particularly for young kids, I think. I think as kids get older, I think it's not just COVID, but again, I think it's the rise of social media and the internet, and there's so much comparison. Right. And, because like you're saying, well, we don't post a lot, but I can guarantee you're not posting the, 3 a.m. wake up whenever they're crying. And that's not like, people aren't being like manipulative to only post good stuff. Like, that's just what you want to post. You want to post the things that make us happy. You want to post the things that bring us joy, or the things that are excitement. And so, but it gives us a false sense of like, everybody else is doing great. And everybody else has this. And I think that's what some of the pressure is. And that's what we've been hearing about with social media and teens and tweens. It's a natural time of comparison. You're trying to figure yourself out. So you're looking to outside sources to kind of see what everybody else is doing. But think about how much information can be coming in from social media. And some kids can handle it well. Right. And some kids have more trouble with it. And so I think, again, I'm not going to say there's a one size fits all when it comes to the internet and social media, but you do have to monitor and understand it and figure out what works for your kid. It's kind of like a driver's license. In Kansas, they have like a very graduated kind of process, right? You don't just give them a license and be like, all right, you're good. And so I think that's kind of, as parents, it's all about doing things kind of gradually and then stepping back. If your kid's gotten in 2 wrecks, you're probably going to be like, okay, we need to do a little something different. We need to be able to teach, right? When they need to be able to learn, or maybe they need more maturity. So I think you let your own values as a family guide you, but then you also look to your kids and see who they are, what their maturity is, and that's kind of how you figure things out. There's no like manual for your kid, for your situation, for your resources.
It's so scary.
It is.
They're like, here you go, there's your baby.
Right.
And right after the hospital, they just hand you the baby to go.
And just because you have a 7-year-old doesn't mean that you're going to know what to do with your 2-month-old all the time.
Oh yeah, that's driving me insane. That's why I earlier I said I get here at 6 a.m. because I'm always up at 3 a.m. He would wake up at midnight to feed, and he would sleep, but he requires you to hold him. And I say require, heavy on the requirement. You put him down, he's like a little warm. He makes so much noise, and then and then from 3 a.m. I'm just holding him, and he's just trying to lift his head up, just staring me in my eye, and just sits there, and I'm just like, this is insane. But what is the cost of the pressure, especially on the parent side? Like, what exactly is the cost of too much pressure?
Anxiety, depression, burnout.
And then on the relationship side, what does that look like? Let's say you put too much pressure on your kid, because I want us to put language around that, because I know a lot of parents that it's happening in their life, but they can't really put the language to them. It's like, I am doing my best to like help my child,
right?
But that could be pressure towards the child that they don't understand, they can't put language around it. Maybe step back. So how, like on the relationship side, what exactly is the cost of that too much pressure?
I mean, it would be the anxiety and the fear of messing up and the fear of failure, or the fear of not being able to come to your parents because they have a hard time handling your struggle.
Right.
So I guess that would be what the cost is.
But like, on the other side, it's like the parents also like missing out on that relationship, that bonding.
Right.
Which, even in my own personal life, I went, I think like 10 years without talking to my dad. It's like, we don't have the greatest relationship. A lot of stuff happened. It kept packing and packing and packing.
Right.
And I feel like I am just in this, I'm just, in like a, I'm trying to put language around it, but like hoarding so much emotion,
sure,
bad emotion, to a point that it got to a point where I don't even know how to communicate anymore, because there's so much there that hasn't been unpacked. But then on the other side of my brain, I'm just like, I wish he just would acknowledge this or just say something.
Right.
But then I know that's never going to happen, because he is who he is.
Right.
But like, how can a parent see that? Because I know my dad can't see it. But yeah, so in your own profession, how can you help them see that?
In my office, I mean, I just try to help them understand in some ways, like, as a parent, who are you?
Right.
As an adult, who are you? What's your personality style? What's your way of interacting with people? And then also thinking about, okay, well, what does your kid bring to the table? What kind of personality do they have? What kind of needs do they have? And it's really about trying to figure out, how do you match those up? How do you both understand like how you respond to your kid for what they need, and understanding also like maybe that's not your way of being. Right. So a lot of times I might have, very stereotypically, I'll own that it's a little stereotypical, but maybe I'll have a high-powered physician or CEO or something like that. Well, they're really good at their job, probably because they know how to say, this is what you do. Right. And they have the vision and they have the understanding, but you can't always bring that home.
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily make you a good parent. And so some of it is also kind of understanding kind of what our strengths are, what areas are not as well developed, and how do we, again, modify that.
Right.
So all the parents that I see, I think they're trying to do their best. And I think that's the bottom line, is also helping understand that like parents are doing the best they can with what they know.
Right.
You can't know till you know.
Right.
And you can't always make people see either. And so sometimes it takes space.
Right.
Sometimes you need space away. So I find that to be true. Sometimes it just is like, okay, once you're off and running, then you can take the space to understand what's going on.
Right.
And then you kind of come back to it.
Yeah.
But you don't have to have a perfect relationship, right? Again, it's all in degrees. So like, if you see something that's off, then you work on course correcting a little bit.
Right.
Right. It's kind of like the law of averages. You want to get it right most of the time. I mean, I got a lot of what ifs.
Right.
I have a lot of things like say like, oh, well, I could have done this, and what if I did this, and what if I did? But those what ifs don't matter, right? Because on average, I feel like what we've tried to do is we've tried to show up, right? And we've tried to support our kids in being confident in them. And that's kind of what I want parents to do is I want parents to have confidence in them and not parent out of anxiety, right? Because we worry so much sometimes about, can my kid handle this? Right? And so sometimes, again, that's where we might kind of smooth it out for them too much. But we want them to be able to know that they can do hard things. Well, the only way you can know you can do hard things is actually to do some of those hard things. And so that's just get it right most of the time, and course correct.
How exactly does a good relationship looks like? Because I know you said that it doesn't have to be perfect,
right?
You don't have to get most of it right, because we're all learning as we grow together as parent and child. But how does a good relationship look like? And I'm asking you this because you've worked with a lot of parents and kids, so I'm sure you've seen a pattern of this is what a good relationship looks like.
It brings me back to this idea of secure attachment. So if you think about a toddler, right? Think about your 7-year-old, right? When they were a toddler, did they just run around and just greet everybody? Or did they kind of like, some of them, they'll hang back and they'll look at you and they'll be like, they'll kind of hang back and they'll take their cues from you. They'll be like, okay, mom and dad are cool, so I think this is cool for me. So they co-regulate and they kind of look to you for that guidance. That's part of a secure attachment. It's that where you're this person that can be there, and then they can always come back to you, right? And it doesn't happen as clearly as it does in the toddler years, but it is this idea that good relationship means that they can know that they can always come back to you, and that you'll always kind of support them. So that's the goal. Communication-wise, I think it means that, again, we validate their feelings, we validate their perspective. A parenting superpower is being able to paraphrase what your kid says. Because when it comes down to it, what everyone wants the most is to feel seen and heard. Right?
Wow, that just got me so chill. As you say that, I'm just like, I'm going to send this to my dad. I'm like,
exactly. But that is, you're looking for that validation from him, right? That like, I get you. I may not agree with maybe what you've done. I wish maybe you've done that, but I also do get you and I get where you're coming from. So validating and paraphrasing your kids doesn't mean you have to agree with them. Doesn't mean that you don't set limits and you don't make a different decision than what they want. It doesn't mean your kids will like you all the time. You're not their best friend. Right? You're not their best friend. You're more like their mentor or consultant to some degree. I think early on, you're more of a manager, have to do everything. And as they get older, you become more of a mentor and consultant, meaning you really have to take their perspective in. But in the end, you still have that say to be like, okay, this is kind of the guidelines that we have. This is the structure. These are the guideposts. But then letting them go and explore and do things. I remember one of my kids, it was my youngest. I feel like the youngest grow up faster, right? Because they always want to do what the older ones do. But he went out on his bike on the trails when I think he was in 2nd grade, which feels kind of unheard of. He was not tethered to anything. There was no phone. There was no Gab watch. There was no nothing. He just went out on his bike on the trails. I was kind of freaking out. But my husband was like, it's fine. I mean, we did this all the time as kids. And the world is actually a really safe place. And he was fine. But that was a great experience for him because he got to go and explore. And he knew that we trusted him to do that. And so those are those moments where you can trust your kid within reason, because we knew kind of where he was going, right? He wasn't crossing like 5,000 busy streets, right? So it's having this kind of cautious exploration to do things. It's having that faith and letting your kids take those steps, even though it makes you feel anxious. Otherwise, man, when they go to college or they go off on their own, parents, you're going to be a mess. If you don't experience letting them go and letting them do things and kind of doing things on their own, you're going to be a mess. And so are your kids, because they won't know how to do things on their own. To do that. My son, my oldest, went to Korea for a year. And people are like, how did you do that? Well, I did it because I knew that was really important to him. And I knew that it fit what he wanted to do. And I knew that he wouldn't be happy in Kansas City. I've already made peace with the fact that he's going to be gone. He will be gone. He will not land in Kansas City. And that's okay because he's not happy here, right? Even though we have a great relationship, from what I can tell, it's not about us. It's about him. And I'm happy. But seeing him be able to do that and knowing that he's capable of doing it. Did it freak me out sometimes? Absolutely. Especially when he went to China. Yeah. Right? Because that, like, you know, and there's no monitoring over there. When he's in Asia, like, there's no Google Maps or Life 360. You don't get to keep tabs on him at all. Yeah. Right? And that feels very foreign to kind of what a lot of parents are used to now. Yeah. Is having those tabs and having that. And I think sometimes that tethering of always knowing what your kid's doing and always knowing your kid always being able to reach you, that undermines independence too. Right. If every time they struggle, they have to call you, then that's not necessarily a good thing because then they don't think they can problem solve on their own.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. That's that's a big one. Because, you know, I was actually thinking about buying my son like a gadget watch just so that I know where he is all the time.
Exactly.
But then I was like, you know what? That would give me anxiety. Just always just seeing where he's at. You know,
because then all of a sudden you're like, where is he?
Yeah, where is he? Yeah, you know, and like technology makes it so easier. And I'm just like, I trust the kid. You know, he's very smart. I know that if he wants to, if he finds himself in a situation, he knows my number. You know, he's gonna figure out a way to call me. Right. And he's only 7. He's always you're
not sending him to Korea.
Yeah. So I will deal with that whenever he decided someday he wants to go to Korea. And it's
not saying that, like, don't buy your kid a Gab watch or don't do that ever, but just be aware. For me, yes. Yeah, it would just be aware. Yeah. Okay.
And, you know, I do want to switch a little bit and then talk about your, like, dissertation.
Okay.
Because of a stat that I saw. It's by the CDC. They said almost 11% of children aged 3 to 17 had current diagnosed with anxiety, which is insane to me. Like, that's very young, from 3 to 17. Right. And it's such a big gap too. Right. And I want to talk about your dissertation, which you did talk about just what is the nature of stigma and what's surrounding emotional and behavioral problems. Right. First, like, what exactly was your dissertation about? Which, you know, I am just guessing the nature of it, but I want to hear in a more extended, a version of what it is.
Right. Well, I had several vignettes where I didn't necessarily say, here's a diagnosis of somebody, but I kind of described what this person, I described what somebody might observe this person. So one person kind of didn't really have anything really going on that you could observe that was maybe concerning. One person had some depressive symptoms. So thinking about, they were kind of quiet, they were withdrawn, maybe they had their head down. Occasionally, maybe you might find them crying, maybe a little bit more isolated. So that was part of that vignette. And then one of them had some behavioral problems, some externalizing things where they were acting out or getting angry a lot or having noticeable challenges in that area. And then I had high schoolers rate them by circling adjectives. How would you describe this person? And they just circled all the bunch of different adjectives, and some were more positive, some were more neutral, some were more negative. And then also they kind of like whether or not they would be friends with this person. And then the other thing about the vignette is, in one instance, they did not get therapy. And then the other instance, they were observed to go to the school counselor. Right. And what I found is that people who were struggling and went to the counselor were viewed more positively than people who were struggling and did not. Right. And so there was much less stigma. And this was, 20 some odd years ago. There was actually much less stigma for getting support. And now I feel like that stigma is like much less in terms of if you're struggling and getting support. I think, the bonus of having more attention to mental health and, all the things the Surgeon General did last, when he was in, he said, we have a loneliness epidemic, we have a, teen mental health crisis, the parents are not all right. So there's been a lot more attention to mental health in our area. And so I think that's made it more, less, having more availability of and access to mental health stuff and people talking about it more. It's okay to not be okay. That's kind of the phrase. Right. makes it less stigma to go see a therapist. Although I'll say at the same time, sometimes it's like, well, we know all this stuff about mental health and we know all this stuff about, emotions and all these things. And then it feels almost like sometimes we've gone a little too far where like, it's not okay to not be okay. Right. Like you have to fix being okay right away. Or if you're not okay, then that means you have a mental health disorder. And sometimes it's just life. Right? We have natural negative reactions or we have natural emotions when something bad happens. Yeah. Right? It's normal, for example, for kids, particularly in the teen and tween years, to have problems in friendships. There may be times where kids don't have any friends or their friendships are unstable or there's a lot of drama. Like that's gone on since, the beginning of time. But now it feels like sometimes if I don't feel okay, then it's like I need immediate help. Right. And so I kind of want to find that balance. Again, balance is kind of my thing is, okay, we want to address challenges that people have, but also not over pathologize them.
Yeah. So like how much does shame plays in this whole stigma when it comes to kids? Because I used to be a kid.
Sure.
And fortunately, I was one of the cool kids because I played sports. I had so many things going on for me. But then I remember I had a friend that I grew up with who, unfortunately was not as popular in the school. But then we grew up together and I stayed friends with him the whole time. But he struggled in school. He struggled with everything. And it got to a point where we actually stopped being friends because I was just inviting him. I wanted him to come with me to all these things. But then it was just so much pressure for him. It was a drag. Right. And now as an adult, I can tell that some shame played in it. It could be either the way he was dressing up, which I even have like pictures of us, which maybe I'll put it up here. Probably not. That's his story. But yeah, how much does shame play in just like in the kid's brain as they go through just life, especially like in school?
Shame can play a big role if they feel like they don't want anything wrong, right? A lot of times, you don't want there to be anything wrong. I can even see like, you're describing yourself, like I was the popular kid and I had everything going. And so if you were struggling internally, like I would imagine it would be hard for you. Like on the surface, everything looks great. Yes. I think it's those people where it feels like everything looks great, that's harder to get help.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. Because it feels like you've got everything going on. So I shouldn't need help or I shouldn't have a problem or I shouldn't be depressed or I shouldn't have anxiety or I should just be able to handle it on my own. I think those are where shame can come in and get in the way of actually getting the help or asking for help or sharing things. It can be pretty lonely as a parent sometimes. Yeah. That, if you've got a kid who's struggling and, you look all around you and nobody's posting anything about anybody struggling. Yeah. And so you don't always know how much to share. Right. And then also, I struggle with, I know I've talked about my kids a little bit here, but like I've also struggled with like, well, yes, it's part of my story because I'm their parent and they're my kids, but also they have their own privacy and their own story and not all of their story is mine to share. Right. And so when I do talk about my kids, I try to make it pretty general. Yeah. But that can also be really lonely if you don't have people that you feel like you can be vulnerable with and say like, I'm having a really hard time or my kids are really struggling. But when, again, you find somebody who gets you, who makes you feel seen and heard and be like, okay, I am not the only one. Yeah. And I guarantee you, in all families, again, we can look and see on the surface a lot of stuff going on underneath, right? Everybody's got something, right? Everybody's got something. And I feel like that's true even growing up. Like if you're not shaped somehow by what your parents did for better or worse, then like you're not human, right? We all have things. And I know my kids will have things based on how we've parented, what their experiences are, because we don't live in a perfect world. Right. We live in the world that makes sense and we do the best we can. Sometimes I'll be like, my middle child would have been great as the only child who lived on a farm, right? But that's not the reality of what we grew up at, what we had. And we also had 2 other kids. So again, we're doing the best we can. Wasn't perfect.
Right.
But, I feel like we just kept trying to show up.
Yeah.
And I feel like they're going to land on their feet. I don't know. Right. This parenting thing, it doesn't end when they're 18.
Yeah, it keeps going.
It keeps going.
Yeah.
But
I keep having the same discussions with my mom. Every now and then I was like, I'm a grown up.
I know.
I'm a grown up now.
I know.
She's like, no.
Right. But I feel like that's the beauty, is that parenting is a long haul, which means there's a lot of opportunities to mess up for you and your kids. Right. And just acknowledging that it's okay that there's struggle, and it doesn't mean anything about how it defines your child and their path. And it doesn't define your worth as a parent if your child's struggling.
So like today, how are kids, like seeing therapy, or are they in like fears of going to therapy, like labeling? Because that's something in my generation, going to therapy was deemed as like, you're crazy.
Yeah. I feel like there's a good portion of the kids that I see that are like, they love coming to therapy. They're excited about coming to therapy. They'll even tell their friends they're coming to therapy.
That's good.
Or they'll share with the teens and tweens, might be like, talk about their therapy or things like that. So I feel like there's a lot less stigma. I feel like the kids, again, that have more trouble coming to therapy are the kids that already have a lot of anxiety about being perfect and not doing things wrong and not wanting there to be anything wrong. Those are the kids that struggle more with the idea of coming to therapy.
So basically, like kids like me that thought they had everything going on. I had so many issues.
Right.
Yeah.
Be kids like me too.
Yeah.
I've gotten past that.
Yeah. So like when it comes to stigma, are boys more like impacted, or like vice versa? Like how does that look like? Because I know in your dissertation you did have some findings for boys and girls, but I know that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And now in 2025, how does that look like?
That's a great question. I don't know that I have the answer to that, but I think I need to go do some research and see kind of what actually that is, because that's a great question to think about, boys versus girls. Right. I mean, traditionally, girls tend to be more talkative and, just share feelings, and tend to be like stereotypically, that's just more on the girl side. And I think, we are in an era where I think we've been talking about toxic masculinity, and that obviously flies in the face of maybe getting therapy.
Yeah.
It's this whole thing. I think it was Johnson County Mental Health Center just put something up on their Instagram feed or whatever, and it, said man up. Right. And so I still feel like there's some of that.
Wait, that was a campaign?
Well, let me change that.
Okay.
Let me change that. Let me
call Bruce right now.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
So, I mean, it said man up, which I think is kind of the theme or the stereotypic is that a lot of people still have.
Yeah.
And then they crossed out the man.
Okay.
And said speak up.
Oh, I love that. Okay,
yeah,
Bruce, you're doing a good job, Bruce.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry, I didn't quite do that. But yeah, I do think that can still be a challenge. Certainly if there's, this idea of manning up, and you shouldn't cry if you're a guy, and you shouldn't have emotions, and, you shouldn't talk about feelings, man up and pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah. My dad used to say that men don't like wipe the floor. And because I grew up in a family where there were like a lot of women, so I used to braid my mom's hair. I was very close. We're still very close, and my dad just wanted us to be like strong men.
Right. Right. So and again, I think there can be balance.
Yeah.
This is not an either or thing. Like sometimes I think we can go too far and dig into the emotion and dig in the talking, and then sometimes we're just circling and swirling around all the negativity and all the emotion, which that's not necessarily helpful either.
Right.
We have to acknowledge what the emotion is. We have to acknowledge what the situation is, but then we have to think about how do we move on, right? So we also don't just want to stuff it all down and just be like, all right, I'm just going to keep going and do the thing. We need that combination of where we acknowledge what's going on, and then we're able to also move on. I call that realistic optimism.
Right.
Let's be real. We don't live in the Lego movie. Not everything is awesome, but we don't want to dwell in that. Like, it is okay to not be okay, but we don't want to dwell in that. We want to think about, okay, well, what do I have in my control? What can I do to help move myself forward? And that's because there's a lot of things that aren't in our control, but we do have control over how we respond to the situation, and how we figure out, like, given the constraints of the situation, is there something I can do that can help me?
Right. Wow. And as you talk about, and I'm trying to go through 100 and something pages of your dissertation as we speak, because you talked about, like how teens, when it comes to I think you said internalizing versus externalizing behavior and how they treat it and how they show up. Can you touch on that a little bit? Because I did put a circle around that. I'm like, I need to understand this more. Do you care to explain that?
So just about what internalizing problems are and externally. So internalizing is more like anxiety and depression and things like that. So a lot of that is more internal. So when we think about anxiety, there's a lot of overthinking, a lot of what ifs. So a lot of it is kind of in the mind a lot, and you don't necessarily see it on the outside necessarily, unless it comes to avoidance. Right. So a lot of times if you have anxiety, then you're going to avoid the thing that makes you feel anxious. And so you might observe it in that sense, but a lot of times you're not going to see that. Same thing with depression. Depression is also more of an internal thing where, again, you're having a lot of feelings. Oftentimes there's a lot of physical feelings where you lack a lot of energy. You may not be as motivated, even though you want to do things. You may not like to do things. So you may be withdrawn and more isolated, but you may not necessarily associate that with depression, right? What if you're a teen or tween and all of a sudden you're in your room more? Okay, well, is that just, normal teenage behavior, or is that, they're withdrawing or they're isolating? Or does it make sense that they're doing that a little bit because they did have a problem with friends, right? And so you're kind of navigating that a little bit. But again, those are things that are less observable. That's why they're internal. And then externalizing behaviors are things like your ADHD hyperactive. Where they have a lot of energy, they're having trouble regulating themselves for the situation. You might see kids who are oppositional and refuse to do what they're doing. You might see kids that have big emotions, get mad easily, those types of things. So the externalizing are external because you can observe them a lot more. Although I will say sometimes they also come from internal states, right? So a lot of times if you have somebody who's kind of depressed and feel bad about themselves and kind of negative, then they may act out, even though they may also kind of feel depressed. Right.
Wow. Man, parenting is hard. Like all of these things that are happening internally, externally for us, and then also for our kids, and we have to understand all that.
And it's always changing and always evolving. Changing. Just as soon as you think you've got it figured out,
it changes.
It changes, right? Or the kid that you think has it figured out. And then you're like, holy crap, why is my kid struggling all of a sudden? Like, that's not supposed to happen. I know that happened with one of my kids. I was like, wait you're not the one that has challenges. What are you doing? Right? Wow. But again, we had to navigate it. And it was okay. It was okay that he struggled, right? I don't like it. I don't want it.
Maybe it's time to have more grace towards my own parents.
Exactly. Yes, we have to have grace for ourselves and for our kids. That again, I'll say it again. You're doing the best you can for what you know now. Right? You can't know what you don't know. Exactly. And so that's where the what ifs don't help. Right?
Well, I have so many questions about your dissertation, but we don't even have the time to go through all that. And now I want to, I have a question that I'm like curious about. Who is Dr. Caroline Danda? Okay. And why did you end up becoming a therapist for kids? I'm sure there has to be some story as to why you decided to do that.
I've thought about that a lot recently. And, part of kind of, I think, what planted the seeds of it is I was adopted. So was my brother. And I think I've always had this wonder about nature versus nurture, right? So how much comes from just your genetics, right? How much comes from how you were raised, right? There's a huge science and research in that whole area. And it's, the answer is it's not one or the other, it's both, right? They both have to have those things. So I think part of it was having that experience of being adopted, had that, my older brother struggled for a little bit. So again, I think that there was always like, I had an understanding that parents sought therapy when therapy was not a thing for him. And so I feel like I also had that lens of it is like, because I think, most families have something going on anyway. And then I felt like I was a good listener, and I liked putting puzzles together. Like I liked thinking about things. I remember I went to France as a study abroad, and as a junior summer. I went to France as the summer after my junior year for a month. I can't believe my parents put me on a plane and had no contact with me for a month. So let me just put that out there. That's like huge. But I can remember I did logic puzzles, like to keep me busy, right? While I was doing that. Who does logic puzzles for fun, right? But that's kind of how my mind wants to look at the patterns, wants to understand the perspectives, wants to see all the different pieces. Right. And so I think that's part of kind of what drew me to psychology. And I also felt like I was really good at school, but I didn't really excel at any one thing. I was like, I was really good at math. I was really good at writing and English. Like, it wasn't like, oh, you're so good at this. This is the direction you need to go. But psychology took both of those things and kind of put it together, and it just made sense. Yeah. And I loved kids. Right. I loved kids. And so as I continued to explore it, it continued to fit for me that's what I wanted to do. Right.
So like how much, especially the fact that you were, you and your brother, you said were like adopted, like how much did that play into you becoming a therapist?
I mean, I don't know if it consciously like played a part where I was like, oh, I'm adopted. I think I should become a psychologist. Right. But I feel like it's more the seeds of the ideas of it, and my mind starting to move towards that nature versus nurture, right? And having that as a background. And I don't even know why I picked up on that, right? Like, I don't know. I can't remember a time where I was thinking, oh, what is this nature versus nurture thing? I just feel like... Yeah. Like part of it was maybe just how my mind worked. So I would say it played a large role in it. So, and it is interesting to think about the nature versus nurture thing. I still think about those things. Yeah. But I think that's what also helps me be a good psychologist, is because I'm really looking at what the kids, what the families, what they all bring to the table, and trying to figure out what works for them. Right? Because I've got all the science, I've got all the research. I understand what the protocols are. Right. You can have the best protocol, but if it doesn't fit in your family and your life, then it's not going to work for you. Wow. And so it's really about thinking about, okay, well, if this is the science we know, how do I adapt that? How do I make this work for this family? How do I make it work for this situation?
That is powerful. I can see why you like logic puzzles now. Do you think there should be like a requirement for every therapist to do a logic puzzle?
Oh, I don't know if you need to do that, but yeah,
because I think it would be very helpful. The fact that you were getting data from every individual in the family,
right,
and then trying to see what works for them, because now you are meeting them where they are instead of the other way around. So so logic puzzles.
Right. It goes back to, Susie has to sit next to John, and John wants to sit across from Joe, but Joe can't sit next to Susie. So those are the things that I would do, is trying to figure out, like, how do you make it all work?
Yeah. How can I bring this puzzle together and create a beautiful painting?
Exactly.
I always try to bring these two paintings in a conversation.
Those paintings are beautiful.
Yeah, because just like you mentioned, it's like life itself. It's very messy. It's very beautiful. It's very colorful.
Right. And it can be both. Yeah. It can be messy, chaotic, and beautiful. Yeah. Because you do have to see the beauty in life. And I think that's where, if you have grace for yourself and, reach out for support and know that you're not alone in all this parenting thing. Like, parenting's hard work.
Yeah, big time.
Everybody says it'll change you, and everybody tells you all the things. But again, until you experience something, you can't really know. And so it's experience is what teaches us and helps us grow. So parenting is just as a human being too, you're always evolving. Right. And so I think that's where you have grace for yourself, is that just looking at everything it's a constant evolution, because nothing is static in our lives. Right. Nothing is the same in our lives. Things are constantly changing in ourselves, around us, the people around us, the world around us. Everything is changing.
Wow. We've come to the end of the conversation, and we've talked about so much, and I haven't even got to like 4 pages of your dissertation. I have a habit of memorizing things, so my brain is like trying to blast out of this hat. because I read so much. I was like, oh my God.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much for coming in today. This has been such a very fun conversation for me. Maybe in the future, I will have you to keep talking about. I have to show you guys our dissertation.
I know.
So I'm not sure if you have a book coming up. Do you have anything that you want to shout out before you end this?
No, I think I'm in the process of maybe kind of, the books are in my head. Mm-hmm. I think my colleague Karen Montgomery and I think we are going to work on updating our book Surviving to Vibing.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
We sent that, we did that pretty quickly in COVID just because we saw the need for it.
Right.
And so right now, I think I've got a lot of ideas in my head that I think are going to be coming out. I'm looking to do a lot more speaking, and because I really want to support parents and what they're doing, and just know they're doing okay.
Right. Wow. I love that. Yeah. I know a lot of superintendents, so I'll send this video for them and see what they think.
I love it. Thank you.
Well, yeah. Well, thanks for coming in today. This has been fun.
All right.